Hello, and welcome to Data Matters Podcast, brought to you by Matatika, the simpler, smarter data platform that doesn't lock you in. In this podcast, we get into the bits and bytes of modern data, uncovering the stories from you, today's data leaders. Hosted by me, Aaron Fethian. So without further ado, let's dive in. Today we are joined by John Napoleon-Kuofie, who is an analytics engineer in the payments domain at Monzo. For those of you who don't know Monzo, they're a huge brand in the UK, 12 million customers, a really attractive coral logo, coral card, and they're changing the banking domain. So really looking forward to hearing from John and what it's like to work in analytics engineering inside a bank, inside this regulated environment, and what makes it different. So let's dive in. Hello, John, and welcome to the show. Absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad that I
Sure
finally
has.
made it.
So it was months ago we met. I think we met at an event at Monzo office or an event where you were talking about marketing mix modeling, perhaps.
Yes, many months ago now.
That's quite a varied spectrum of data to be working on. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about what it's like to work where you work and what kinds of data you've actually worked on?
Yeah, so currently I work at Monzo. So it's like a digital bank. Started off as sort of like prepaid cards. Many people were using it for travel, and then it sort of grew to be a proper bank, and now has I think 11 to 12 million customers in the
Hmm.
UK, and hopefully expanding globally soon. Um, to sort of give you some context on my background has predominantly been in marketing data. Um, I started my career actually building market mix models, hence why I was talking about that at the analytic engineering meetup.
Hmm.
But then sort of moved more, I say, back end, just kept them progressing back. So I started off as an analyst, then moved more into analytics engineering because I sort of care more about building things at scale and like data structures and things like that. And now I work in the payments sort of business unit
Hmm.
of Monzo,
Yeah.
where we're sort of building out all the models related to different payment schemes.
Yeah. That journey actually from analytics to what you describe as more technical, it feels really familiar. I speak to a lot of people, and that's a fairly common journey actually as they get more and more into the data and the sort of technical side of it. And we'll return to that in a second. One thing I wanted to say about Monzo before we go too much further, for anyone who's not from the UK and listening, they were really well known for a card, right? Like they had this like fluorescent yellow, fluorescent orange card that was made them very noticeable and recognizable in the market. And
It's called the hot coral.
hot coral was
It's
it?
it's
Okay.
a it's just the official kind of name, which is actually how I got introduced to Monzo. I just saw someone tapping that card, and I was just like, "What
Hmm.
card is that?" And then instantly, they're like, "Oh, it has all these features. I use it for travel." And then I think there was at that point there was like a wait list to sign up to Monzo, and
Yeah.
yeah, eventually got the card and sort of never looked back.
Yeah, and I think that to me that's a fascinating differentiation in an undifferentiated market. Banking is to like, most users is just the same experience, but this small, you know, trendy card actually made them stand out, and then obviously they offered customer features and kind of grew from there. Um,
Mhm.
I wonder then, inside a bank and working on the data inside a bank, what's it like? But all these other experiences you had, sort of almost a versus. Like, what's it like in a bank versus working on traditional marketing data, say?
I would say like the level of scrutiny is higher. Obviously, there's lots of regulation, there's lots of audits and things like that. So when you're, I think in marketing, there's sort of a perception of like the general directions. Okay, we can accept differences, but in total, if the proportions are right, we can accept that.
Hmm.
And I think also in marketing, there's known flaws in the data. Like you can change your attribution model and then the picture changes. If your tracking fails, then potentially your numbers are going to look different between your source system and your third party
Mm-hmm.
system just because of tracking. So we kind of expect like a level of error of like, between 1 and 5%, sometimes even higher. But within banking, it's like it's almost to the penny. You want to be correct. Like ultimately, it's like every penny needs to be accounted for, which I think is very very different to what I've been used to when I was in the marketing side. So I think it's okay for me because I've always been that person that if it's a 1% discrepancy, it's 1% too high. So I've always tried to like whittle it down to as low as possible. So I think I'm quite used to doing like reconciling things, and I get annoyed by the
Yeah.
penny mismatches. So maybe banking was like my true calling, and I've
It's
arrived.
interesting. Both the analytics to engineering journey plus the let's say marketing to banking journey, very like yeah, it does sound like it has found you in this kind of like environment where it matters. You're getting it exactly right. What does it look like internally when it's not right? Like how is it? Is it process? Is it technology? Is it perfect data when it lands? What's it like to get it right inside the bank?
Yeah, I think there's just different layers to it. So there's risk controls. So sometimes we accept there's a difference, but we need to know exactly why there's a difference. So, for example, there might be an incident where data wasn't sent from the back end because something went wrong, but we've recorded that as a bank movement in another system.
Mm.
And if those systems don't reconcile, we just need to know why they don't, and then we just record that uh, as like a mistake, and then
Mm.
it allows us to kind of audit what's gone on. Then I think to your point, there's the technology side where there's systems that are working in the background trying to reconcile different sources together. And if there is a discrepancy, it will automatically fire some sort of alert that we want to investigate. So the technology helps us expose the problem, but then people need to figure
Mm.
out why there is a difference. Like I don't think we're quite at the stage where the technology tells us what was wrong. It kind of takes like the manual kind of looking into the data.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense actually. So I've worked in banking and banking software, and the level of rigor around the technology change is much higher than other industries, and those systems, both people and technology, I think that's one of the things that I noticed about the environment. The tools, though, that they're actually using, are they bespoke built or are they off the shelf? Are they like regular things people have heard of, or are they like what are these tools that are processing the data and capturing the differences and doing the checking?
I guess to give you, I guess, context of like how Monzo works from an architecture perspective, we have like the backend system is sort of in AWS, and then what we do is we send those events to our warehouse, which is in BigQuery, and then we would build dbt models on top of the data that's in BigQuery. And then with that, you have like the usual testing and alerting that we would have in place for to help us understand if there's discrepancies between models, I guess at a sort of daily level. But then each half we get audited, and that's where we will run bespoke models, still DBT models, but these models will actually just show month by month the differences between two data sources. Well, actually, in our case, it's three different data sources, and ultimately, you want all three of these data sources to have an exact match. And then, if there isn't an exact match, we would go and look at that particular month and understand why there's a difference. And so far, I don't think we haven't been able to not explain any differences, which is obviously a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that level of scrutiny, and obviously affects your architecture. Obviously affects how much data you hang on to and process, and the methods. When it comes to delivering change, is the onus on you as the individual, or are there like development teams, testing teams? Like, are there gates? How does that side of it work?
I think at Monzo there's like a very much a big uh culture of like all ideas are welcome, and it doesn't matter if it comes from someone senior, someone junior, like it's as long as it's a good idea. It's just about sort of writing a proposal and gathering feedback, and it can be brought forward. Like before, we didn't have these alerts that would say, oh, there's a £20 difference between this account and this account. But someone has brought that forward and said, oh, I think I could create something in maybe a few weeks to trial it, and then everyone's gone, oh, this is awesome, let's roll it out to multiple teams. So I think, yeah, the culture of Monzo is like an idea comes from one person and then it can be expanded. Like this is a non-data example, but like there's a new feature in Monzo called undo payments, which if you send like money to an account that you didn't want to, or say if I wanted to send you £10, but accidentally sent you 100,
Hmm.
I had the option to undo it within a certain time limit. And that idea came from a hackathon last year. And it's like, it's so cool seeing something that was just an idea last year that is rolled out a year later and it's like sort of like receiving all this good press. And I think though it's not just the big things like that, like undo payments that kind of get formed, it's
Hmm.
also small things like how do we send Slack alerts to, how do we get alerts sent to a Slack channel, is
Yeah, yeah.
also comes from just someone's idea and they just make it happen.
Well, that sounds cool. It sounds like quite a freedom, freedom to propose things. Sounds like quite a cool environment to work in.
Mhm.
What would you say the biggest challenges for you are at the minute?
Um, I would say the biggest challenge at the moment, I guess what I'm personally facing is I've come into Monzo about a year and a half now. I've inherited a team and inherited a lot of just things. There's a lot of data models. Like we have in payments alone, we have like 1,000 DVT models, and being able to understand before we were able to actually see the lineage of these models because Airflow would just break when you try to expand it. We now have tooling that allows us to see the lineage, which has been like a super helpful. But
Mm.
again, just trying to see the lineage of 1,000 models is still
Hard to
even though you can see
navigate.
the bubbles, you can still it's still expanding. You're like, where do I start? Um, so being able to kind of understand my domain has been difficult because it's sort of the first time I've come to a place where I haven't sort of touched or built everything. So I kind
Mm.
of just knew at my previous place, I was there for quite a long time. But I just knew, oh yeah, this joins to this and that joins to that. And I've created a system of for my domain. Well, in this case, the system has been created for me, but there's not any sort of clues of what the system is, and you kind of
Mm.
just have to like figure it out on the fly. And it's been a lot of just a lot of actually just looking at the code and trying to trace it back yourself to try to get this picture of all how all these things interconnect. Um, So I think with that, the issue becomes like, how do you scale that? You're kind of scaling things that you don't quite understand.
Mm.
You're like, oh, why have we done that? Why have we done this? And you sort of run with it, but ultimately and I think each year that goes by, you have less understanding of it.
Okay.
So what we're looking to do actually, which is like a Monzo wide thing, is like do a re-architecture of all the models. And my my goal is like, I don't want to have 1,000 models. Obviously, if 1,000 models is what is needed to tell us the answers that we need, then we'll keep it. If it's 2000, it'll be 2000. But
Mm.
I just have a hunch that it'll be less models that
Yeah.
we'll need to be able to ultimately serve the payments business
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yeah.
data that they need.
And where do you start with a challenge like that? Like, how do you even get to the first model to deprecate or remove? Or what are you thinking?
I mean, this has been top of mind for me. I'm actually thinking about it, yeah, for the last sort of 4 weeks. And I think it's been good because like a lot of teams have been thinking about it. So, for example, I was speaking to the operations team, who also thought about it, and they kind of gave me some, I guess, food for thought that's allowed me to now think about my approach. But there's sort of two approaches. You can think about the end use case and think and sort of work backwards, which in my case I didn't necessarily wanted to do because I still have I'm not sure about the end use cases that well, and also I'm like, are people actually using our data models?
Mm,
So
mm.
we think that someone wants a transactions model, but are people actually using it? So I would the approach that other teams have taken, and I think is a good one, is actually just to start from scratch, from conceptually what is payments. So um a payment has it's almost like what features does a payment have? And
Mm,
it's like,
mm.
okay, so it's the transfer of money from one account to another account. What features does that have? It has authentication, it has maybe a payment limit, etc. And sort of building up all these concepts in your mind.
Mm.
And then what are the sort of building blocks that allow you to create, I would almost say, a system? And the way I've sort of come down to it is essentially it's all about the movement of money, but
Mm.
the way you move money has different infrastructure to it. So
Yeah.
we have faster payments, which is how you send money from a UK bank account to another UK bank account. We have Monzo to Monzo payments, so that's sending money from a Monzo customer to another Monzo
Mm,
customer.
mm.
You have international payments and so on. And being able to understand what are the key components for all these different building blocks, so you can almost have like a unified model, is kind of my thinking. And then and then to wrap that up, there's like different layers of use cases. So we have people that want all the detail of this MasterCard payment has the, I don't know, the authentication number, the clearing message, chargebacks, all this detail. And that would be useful for someone in payments.
Mm.
But there's an
Mm.
abstraction of that is some person just wants to know, was there a MasterCard payment and was there like a security check on it?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's almost just like it's like a higher level model. So
Mm,
that's
mm.
also what I'm thinking about. Is like what is the target audience for the groups of models that we're creating? And it's obviously easier to start off with everything and then sort of move to more higher level abstractions that
Yeah.
will be used for people that are less into all the details of the payment and just want to know how many payments were sent yesterday. So I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
those are just two things. It's like what are the building blocks, and then what are the use cases at the different layers that we're trying to create. And then I think to your
That sounds like decent advice for pretty much anyone who's trying to grapple with a large system. You know, go back to first principles and actually speak to the people who need to use it. And then they actually that debate about refactor or rebuild is it's a pretty hard one to answer. But it feels like to me, from what you're saying, is that with 1,000 models, you have knowledge the original system designers didn't have. So that gives you the better perspective to build something more appropriate to the business now and in the future. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's the whole thing. It's like it's kind of like a trade-off between it may be easier to migrate in terms of a speed perspective of like just do a like for like
Mm.
migration with some improvements, or are you going to just start from scratch and say, this is how I want it to be designed? Um, and I prefer the latter simply because we have more control. And if we do it right, it should be more future-proof because we'll have the right documentation, for example. So
Yeah.
if
You'll
I'm
have
not at
the
Monzo no
authority to
longer,
get you'll
yeah,
produce the result. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sort of a big believer of like being able to, you want to be able to translate how you were thinking at the time,
Mm,
because
mm.
ultimately someone might look at my system design 5 years later and think it's absolutely rubbish, and it might be for where Monzo is 5 years later when we're in multiple countries and things like that. But I at least want them to read what my head was saying at the time and go, okay, it wasn't right for now, but it was right for then,
Yeah.
and now I get that perspective. I understand what I need to change to make it more future proof because yeah, nothing's gonna what I design now is yeah, I imagine in 10 years it may not be
It can't be right.
appropriate.
If the company and the domain keeps growing, it can't be right for everything. And that's
Exactly.
actually, I think before the call we were chatting about some of your pet peeves and I think you said it was testing. I wonder what the link here is. I sort of have some ideas, but between this big refactor and testing, what's your thoughts on how that works and how it could be better?
Yeah, for me, I was speaking to like someone in my team about this earlier. It's just like when we do this migration, all tests will be removed, and we will start from scratch thinking about whether this test is appropriate. So,
Hmm.
for example, I think people will just whack like a not null test just like on everything. So, oh, not null, not null, not null. But and like fair enough, it shouldn't be not null, but is that true?
Hmm.
And if a null value comes in, what are you going to do about it? And if the answer is absolutely nothing, then don't bother write a test for not null because tests
Nobody's
are
going to play. Yeah.
yeah you don't want to create noise. And I've seen it before where like you have so many tests that go through your channel that people get blind to it, and then when the actual real important failure comes in, no one sees it because you've just got loads of not nulls or well, I wouldn't say inappropriate tests, but tests that you're basically not going to action. And I
Hmm.
think every test needs to have an appropriate action, and I think that's the structure I want to create in this new migration. Because ideally, what I would have is you say what the test is, why it's important, and if it fails, what's the escalation policy? Do you go to a particular Slack channel and say it's failed? Um, does it some test failures should be causing incidents, like you have to
Mm-hmm.
actually get a group of people together to figure what's up. There's some low level alerts where it's just like you just need to be informed about it and it needs to be fixed within say 7 days,
Yeah.
and or like there's a or you need to re emit events from the back end potentially. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of like having like a level categorization of alerts of like these are serious ones. If they come through, like they need to everything needs to be stopped and we fix them there and then. There's some things that can be fixed within a week. Maybe there's things that should be fixed in a month, but ultimately it's just every single test needs to have a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And when a test fires, there needs to be a equivalent action that everyone knows that is the action to take in the team, that we're going to respond to it, or you're just going to have, and I've seen it in every single department, every single team, you just have loads of alerts that you do absolutely nothing about.
Exactly. And so I think I'm hearing you say there's two things to change there: process around the people and what you do about it, and then the technology to take the right action, alert the right person, the right severity. Does the well, we have to assume the process doesn't exist yet because there is some level of ignoring tests going on. Does the technology exist, or is that also part of the challenge? Is to bring in new tools to change the alerting? To like, is that part of what you need to do now to make that happen?
I think my goal is to work with what we have. So we still have DVT alerts and they go into Slack channels. What I would love is to be able to acknowledge alert and it not necessarily fire the next day because that's you
Gone through
almost want to,
already. Yeah.
yeah, it's like we've already seen it, we've triaged it, maybe we're going to fix it on Friday. But then if that alert comes in every single day, I saw the alert on Thursday, on Monday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm seeing the alert again, even though
Mm.
I've kind of triaged it in my mind. I'm just going to push the fix on Friday. That can cause alert fatigue. So that's one thing I would love to improve, but I haven't necessarily thought about how to do that within the confines of using DBT test alerts.
Yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, this is, I guess, part of the, well, for me at least, the fascination of, as you get to more technical domains, it's infrastructure, it's platform, it's solving a lot of people's problems in the, in the round rather than the next issue, which can be the sort of more analytics focused, business focused. It tends to be the next question, the next question. Yeah, very, um, you know, my experience was it's quite repetitive when you're working on the business. It can be fun and it can be exciting close to the customer, but it can also be, oh, we're just cranking the handle on the same thing. Um,
Yeah, completely agree.
so looking ahead a little bit, what do you think's unique to the banking technology domain? Or what's down the track that you think they need to respond to, or what's the kind of, and where's the investment going? And I'm avoiding leading the witness, but is it AI or is it something else? What is it that they need that isn't there now?
But as in like from a like a customer perspective.
I think less so on the customer side and more so your customers, like you as a technology provider to the internal stakeholders. That might be more the place I was thinking. Like, what do they need that you're trying to provide them?
I think I kind of just see the job as how do we provide insights as quickly as possible for them to inform decision making. I
Mm,
think that's just the name of the game. So obviously leverage AI to do that in the sense of, oh, how many payments what was the acceptance rate for MasterCard payments yesterday? And it's just like it just pings you the number because it has access to your underlying data. I
mm,
think all that stuff is really, really cool. I think we just need to be careful not to like make it gimmicky. Ultimately, it's just about I always go from the perspective of like what are my stakeholders' day-to-day job?
mm,
How can I make that better through data? And of course, AI is going to be a part of that, but ultimately, but also having like scalable data models that are easy to understand, even dashboards that are grouped up nicely. Like there's so much low-hanging fruit
mm.
that you can tackle without thinking about AI.
Yeah,
And I think ultimately, if ultimately your data models and I think again, I need to go back to my system. If I create a good system, it's easier for AI to leverage that. I don't think I could stick AI on top of what we have now and produce a good answer. So
right. The
there's a
foundation data is
foundational stuff to be fixed
mm,
first,
mm.
for sure.
Compared to many companies, do you think? Well, I have an opinion, but let me try and answer this question. Do you think there's more analytics in banking than other companies?
It's difficult for me to say because ultimately, I've only ever worked at Monzo, so I don't necessarily know about traditional banks.
Mm,
Um, I would say, from what I've seen, there's more of a hunger
mm,
for analytics. And I think it's when I compare it to the place that I was before was like a e-commerce company. It was just like they were just so ridiculously data hungry. They would just want everything was just like, how can I get data to make a decision? What lever can I pull to ultimately like create more money, revenue,
mm,
reduce my costs? So I think it's just like there's a mentality of like data rules or let's just get as much as we can, more data the better, which is maybe not necessarily the best mindset, but it was it's very cool to be in a place where people are just like, I need data, I need data, where can I get it? Like you're almost like their best friends
Yeah.
from that perspective. I
Yeah.
think within banking, I think there's I think what I've noticed is maybe like data's more operational. It's like, oh, we need this data for this report. And it's just like
Mm.
very much like the number is the number. Can you let us know? And you're like, yeah, there was 10 million transactions yesterday. Cool.
But
But I
less
think there's
so
more
from an inquisitive, what difference does that make to the business, perhaps compared to e-commerce? Yeah.
exactly where I think someone will be like, what's that's 10, there was 10 million transactions yesterday. What was it? What was it last week? How can we get it higher? Should it be higher?
Yeah.
And more questions come. I think, yeah, in banking, there's like an element of like, it's just, it is what it is. But I also think that's just the journey that we're on. Like, ultimately, that's most people just want to know that their numbers are correct. I think that's
Yeah.
the first step. And then
Lay
after
the
that, it's like,
foundation. Yeah.
yeah, how do you improve those numbers is the next step. And I think within payments, we're on that journey for sure.
Mm.
We have like a new GM who's like super into the numbers and into details, and he's just like, yeah, we need to crank these levers so we can improve our revenue
Mm.
numbers.
Mm.
And I think it's an exciting space to be in. I think it's exciting and frustrating because ultimately it's like you need to fix your foundations before we can really
Optimize. Yeah.
accelerate that insight, which I wish we were a little bit further ahead than. Don't get me wrong, we're in a good place. Like we can get the numbers, but I think it's the difficulty of getting those numbers where you might have to join this table and this table and this table
Mm. Mm.
rather than maybe just go to one table or it just being like a simple join, you
Yeah.
know.
Your gut feel is the question was relatively simple. It should be a relatively simple effort. Yeah, I actually find that
Exactly.
quite insightful. In that, if I think about the way you've talked about it, a company on a sort of more digitized digital journey is going to be more data hungry, and actually, you're right. You can't compare necessarily all the banks, but probably the newer, more digital banks are probably more data hungry. Do have more people who care about the data than traditional banking. You know, more operational, more possibly more um, sort of locked in their ways, if you like, and that's probably the
Yeah.
same in the physical world. You know, e-commerce is like it's a scale business, whereas a shop on the high street is a very much you know who's walking past. You know, it's going to be the same kind of business, and you're limited
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah, I think to like add to that is like I don't think again someone from a traditional bank, correct me if I'm wrong, like I doubt like traditional banks are looking at active monthly users or revenue per user. They're just thinking, how many deposits do I have, or how much money can I
Well,
loan
they might
out,
be, but
or
not
over.
as regularly. Like it might be sort of a yearly report as opposed to like a daily. You know, that kind of order of magnitude.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that's the difference. I would assume is that it's like really the sort of digital banks are thinking about customer acquisition and revenue per customer is probably one of their sort of North Star
Mm,
metrics, while a North Star metric for a traditional bank might just be like deposits in the bank.
mm, mm.
And they wouldn't necessarily care how many customers they have as long as it's like the deposit numbers going up.
Yeah, like the health over the sort of growth, perhaps. Yeah,
Hmm.
this has been really cool discussion, Dominic. Thanks for talking us through what it's like inside a bank, and actually, like my takeaway is quite an interesting place. Yeah, actually, and particularly if you're into the precision of it, and the kind of the things that attracted you. That sounds like a great place to work. Um, yeah, really delighted to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us.
Yeah, been a pleasure. Yeah, glad we finally got to discuss it. And yeah, I would say yeah, it's an interesting journey. I think I'm gonna pitch Monzo now. The I'll say Monzo is a good intersection of like tech and finance. So if that is your interest, I do think Monzo is a great company to work for, and there's a lot of technical challenges to overcome, and then it's also it depends what your sort of mindset is, but like I really buy into Monzo's vision of like sort of making banking work for everyone. And it's when I'm here, like it's not just a tagline. I think we live and breathe it by the products that we launch
Hmm.
and ultimately how we try to treat our customers.
I love that. And I can definitely vouch for it. When you've hosted events there and there's a huge turnout and a great buzz, like yeah, there's a definite positive to working for a good brand and a brand that you can believe in. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Brought to you by Matatika, the simpler, smarter data platform. Data Matters aims to share the latest technology directions and your experiences in modern data. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not hit the follow button and stay up to date with new episodes as they're released. Finally, if you feel the episode could benefit someone you know, please share it with them. And we're always on the lookout for guests with interesting experiences to share. This has been Data Matters. I've been Aaron Fethian, your host. And until next time, bye for now.